Today we're talking about the close range meta, and right now we're at a point where there's probably not going to be any weapon balancing changes for at least a few weeks. You can see the battle pass still has about 25 days left before we get the start of season 6, which will likely come with 2 brand new weapons, and then we'll have a mid-season update around the time Vanguard comes out. So I'm pretty sure, unless there's some kind of emergency changes with loadouts, these things are going to be pretty reliable from now all the way until the end of this season. If you enjoy the video, learn something new, please do me a favor, hit the like button. If you're brand new, want to find your way back, double check, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. So if you've been following the channel for a while, you know that I have kind of the TTK breakdowns for a lot of the changes that happen pretty much regularly. We try to keep it as up to date as possible. Sometimes things may slip through the cracks, but it's usually a good representation of kind of understanding how the weapon breaks down. And that becomes important, especially when you look at weapons. You kind of have the top section that we can see highlighted here. We'll go ahead and zoom in a little bit so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But you can look at a specific weapon. So for example, like with the CX9, we can kind of look at the overall TTK, shots to kill. That gives us damage per mag, average damage output based off the rate of fire. You get all these different numbers going on. But this bottom section is where you kind of want to look at if you're going through and using the spreadsheet that is linked near the top of the description, because this gives you a good idea or an accurate representation of how common a particular TTK is going to be. In this particular case, it's going to be 12 shot to kill in the limbs for this example, and you can get 11 shots to kill, but you need 7 out of the 11 shots to be stomach or chest, which is pretty reasonable. It's about half the shots at least hitting the torso. It would be even better if it was like only 2 stomach or chest shots, or 1 stomach or chest shot, or it just had a higher damage value. But you can kind of use this to kind of assess weapons head to head. And generally, when you go ahead and stack it up on the spreadsheet, we get a general idea of what's good, what's not. And that's kind of what we have here in this bottom section. There's a lot of weapons because I continue to add a bunch based off people saying, hey, you know what, you should probably include this one. You should probably include that one. And I've done this a little bit of color coding to make it a little bit easier for a lot of players when they come over to the spreadsheet, because the number one question I get asked daily is, what is the meta? What's the long range meta? Do you think this weapon's good? Do you think it's viable? And I think by color coding these, at least gives you a general idea of where those weapons sit within the meta. So obviously these aren't locked in hard fast. Sometimes they move up and down slightly depending on your individual skill level. And I tried to kind of make a general observation of where the weapons will sit based off understanding the people's general skill that are going to be using the weapon, which is you, the viewer, or a high skilled player or low skilled player, kind of balance that out against trios. In this particular case, I put worth using in yellow. So we got the Kimbo M19s, is still pretty good. You could use the Kimbo Renettis. There's other pistols you could use. Most of the Kimbo ones are at least usable, especially when they're point blank, because their TTKs are generally competitive, especially since they've slowed down the TTK a lot of the close range weapons. And then we have stuff like the Fennec, which is cool, but the ammo capacity ends up being an issue. So you have to be particularly skilled to use that weapon, or just playing like solos or barely duos. ASVAL, same thing, ammo situation. Psychov, it's kind of more of a ghost thing. You kill one player, you pick up their guns, and then you move on from there. The full auto Tech 9 is pretty solid, but again, ammo capacity, 48 bullets. The damage output isn't all that great, and you kind of have some issues with it. But overall, 1400 damage per mag is pretty solid. I know some people get a little confused, or it's high to level, or they don't want to go through the trouble of unlocking it. So it's worth using. Definitely check it out. But nothing special. And then we have the MP7, kind of like more like an OG weapon because it's part of the Modern Warfare weapons. But when you actually start comparing it to some of the other ones, the mobility isn't there, the range isn't there to compete with some of these weapons in terms of TTK, even though it is pretty solid when you're within about 10 or 12 meters. Then you have the Diamatti, which is pretty solid. It's a single, but it relies heavily on getting headshots. You can see the TTK jumps from 684 down to 450. But you got to get headshots in the mix. If you're not getting headshots, you are going to die using the Diamatti. Plus the ammo per mag, damage per mag isn't all that high at roughly 1,000. So you got to factor those things in there. So that is usable, go for it. And then we got top tier viable. And usually there's some reasons why you would use these. Maybe the meta is actually strong enough to separate itself. And most players will be able to use that meta because it's usually easy to use. That's kind of one of the number one things for most metas. It's either broken TTK, easy to use, or a combination of both of those. Because if it's easy to use, that means you're going to be getting really close results to the theoretical TTKs that we see on our screen. So in this particular case, we have the CX9, which is still pretty solid because it's very forgiving because of that rate of fire. We have the Modern Warfare and Cold War MP5s, which are still pretty good. You can see they rank up pretty high in terms of DPS, so the output's pretty good. I think the magazines and the recoil is a little bit harder to use, but they're still pretty solid, especially if you get at least one headshot in the mix. Then we have the PPSH, kind of low in the end because they've made some modifications to make it significantly easier to use. So even though its TTK isn't anything flashy, you get really good results at getting very close to those TTKs. Obviously, you got to factor in open bolt delay, so it's a little bit faster TTK that way. But I've included the open bolt delay in this particular scenario. Then lastly, in orange, we have the titanium DMR, and specifically the titanium because that's where you're going to get this incredibly fast fire rate. If you're able to trigger cap that out right around 8 taps per second, which is pretty manageable, I think, for the vast majority, but who knows? I think some people are below that, above it. I've heard of people getting like 12 clicks per second or triggers per second. So you can definitely be hitting that trigger cap relatively easy. They rebalanced the damage profile, but didn't really impact their TTK. But at the same time, they also modified the recoil that made it significantly easier to use. One of the biggest problems with the DMR and the type before is if you spam the trigger and you were actually reaching that trigger cap, it can get a little bit hard to see and it would shake violently. They removed a little bit of that. So the consistency while reaching the trigger cap has kind of hit that premium. So even though the TTK hasn't changed from before this update, it's significantly easier to get close to that TTK, and it's always going to be a 5-shot to kill anywhere on the body. If you manage to get one headshot in the mix, it will end up lowering the TTK to a 4-shot to kill, which you can see right there is 385, which is disgusting. Pretty broken, the range you can do on it. Personally, I prefer an optic, but we'll touch a little bit on that. Then we get into what I think is the meta, and obviously we have the OTS still in the meta. Even though it did get nerfed, it's kind of broken within that range. Obviously, you can include shotguns in the mix. I generally don't talk a lot about those, even though you can use a street sweeper. The Gallo auto attack sprint makes it a little bit hard unless you aim down sight. You have the Jack 12, which is still pretty nasty, but I generally don't like to include those because those are very specific play styles, and how you got to use the weapon has to be very specific to that playstyle. So OTS, you can see that its TTK is pretty nutty with or without headshots. And then once you get about 10 meters out, then it kind of drops off. But normally if you're barrel stuffing, you are winning the gunfights just because it's full auto. You're able to get fast reloading. Bullfrog, versatile, good sniper support option. Kind of in line there with the PPSH, depending on how you want to use it. And it has a decent sized mag starting off the bat, 50 rounds, which gets you 1740 per mag, which is very competitive when you actually look at the SMGs in terms of damage per mag. And then the Mag 10, still all around pretty easy to use. The thing that puts this one a little bit higher is the fire rate. You can see it's kind of even there with the CX9. I think in terms of Mac, the mobility puts it over the top against the CX9, or the CX9 might potentially be in the probably meta category. And that's kind of how that ends up working out. So once we have that information, you kind of have a general idea of what's good and what you want to use. Now you can actually go to the spreadsheet section of the class setup for every weapon, which I have here on the bottom left. You can go ahead and tab over. And this is something we went through on stream today as of me making this video. And we went through and we corrected the different rankings. So you get a good idea of where the weapons are currently sitting, what's competitive as a sniper support. And if you're looking for a loadout for one of those specific weapons, all you do is scroll down. If you want the Mag 10 OTS, if you want the Milano, the PPSH, the Bullfrog, you get a good idea of what those loadouts look like. If you want to swap an attachment here or there to kind of better suit your needs, you're more than capable to do that. And that's pretty much it. That is the close range meta currently within Warzone after the mid-season update for the next 3 weeks or so. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the content. If you did, please do me a favor, hit the like button. If you're brand new and want to find your way back, double check, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. Thank you for watching as always. Have a great day.